Bolton Community Radio.
Now, my guest in the studio today is Stephen Nearey, and Stephen has written a fascinating book called The Nearly Man. And it's there's a reason why it's called The Nearly Man, but we'll have to let the listeners buy the book and read it. So let's start at the beginning. You came from quite a religious Catholic family, really, didn't you? Your parents were both quite religious, and your older brother was as well, and they encouraged you to go down the route you eventually went. So should we start from your background?
Yeah, sure, Sue. Yes, in fact, Dad was originally the religious person. He was a very strong Catholic. When he married Mum, Mum was a Protestant, and the marriage caused all sorts of problems in the family because of that. In fact, because my mother married my father, the rest of her family didn't speak to her for like years and years and years. So it was pretty bad. But anyway, she did actually convert to Catholicism and became the staunchest of Catholics that you could ever see in the end. And of course, my elder brother Arthur, he became a priest, still is a priest in Littleborough in Rochdale. And so, yes, you could say it was quite a Catholic family, but that was the nature of the upbringing.
Because there would have been a lot of pride in a Catholic family for their children to go down that route, wouldn't there?
It is. In those days, particularly in the 1950s, it was a huge pride for any Catholic parent to have a son who was a priest, or, in fact, any member of a religious community. So my parents, I know, were absolutely proud, and and therefore they would encourage me quite naturally to take the same route, which they did.
Now, your father actually used to go to meetings, didn't he, where he would dress in, was it the monk's robes, and he was involved with a certain yes. group, wasn't he? Yeah.
Yes, in fact, that was from the Galton Monastery, a famous monastery, which most people that live in and around Manchester will know about. It is a very famous building, and particularly famous even today because it's such a magnificent structure, even though it isn't now a church. But in those days, it was owned by the Franciscan friars. And my father was brought up in that area in Moston, and therefore he went to church there from being a child. And even when we moved away to Middleton, to the Langley estate, my father would take the long journey across town. Every month we'd get two buses, one into Manchester and another out to Moston, and we'd go to the monastery there. And I found it quite fascinating, but also quite eerie in many ways, because I was only very young, 5, 6, 7, I think, when we went there. And my father would dress up in the same garb as the Franciscan friars, and this was actually a group of lay people like my father who sort of had this sort of supplementary religious organisation attached to the Franciscans. So he would go there, and every month they went and prayed and had a service. So it was quite interesting.
Because people forget, in the 50s, the idea of Protestant and a Catholic marrying. Your mum's name was Lily, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right,
and your father was Arthur Thomas.
Yes.
And so to marry a Catholic marrying a Protestant was kind of very, very. I mean, even much later than that. I mean, I married in 1970, so even at that period, it was quite a kind of an exceptional thing, and it was certainly frowned upon.
Definitely frowned upon and very exceptional. People tended to marry within their own religious groups. And so, as I say, when my mother started going out with my father, my mother's family didn't like it at all. And then when she actually converted to Catholicism, that was even worse. It was almost anathema. So it was caused terrible problems in the family, and those problems really continue even to today, to some degree.
You were a Man City fan, weren't you? And your oldest brother, I think there was quite a competitive streak between the siblings, wasn't there?
All the
and
time.
He was Man U and you were Man City. Yeah.
That's right. That's quite interesting. That tends to happen in families from Manchester. And in fact, my elder brother Arthur, it's his own fault really, because he being 2.5 years older than me, he actually took me to my first football match, and it was right across the road from where he went to college at St. Bede's. and Main Road was practically just a quarter of a mile away. And he took me to see City against United, and at that stage I didn't support anybody in particular. But when I saw that Arthur was cheering for United, I thought, I'll go the other way. And City won 3-0 at Main Road, and there you are. The battle continues even till today.
Having been the firstborn as well, your older brother, he was particularly bright as well. You felt a bit in awe of him?
I did. I probably still do, actually, in many ways. Arthur was always very bright, very intelligent, a bookworm. I was probably the opposite. I was quite slow for my age. I didn't read except for the Beano and the Dandy, that sort of thing. Arthur would be reading the Encyclopedia Britannica on the toilet, things like that. So yes, it was difficult for me following in his footsteps in many ways. Very difficult.
Now it's quite a jump from coming from a religious family to actually. Am I hearing noises? Right, okay. We've got your mobile going off, right? So this, you see, you can tell it we're actually live, can't you? We're live on air because we have. I don't know whether when you listened to the previous pre-record there was a phone going on in the background, and it wasn't actually in my house; it was in Nigel's house. But that's another story. Okay, right. Okay, so I know where we were up to. I'm lost now. So. You were very interested in football, obviously, and you sounded very talented as a footballer coming later on in the book, which we'll get to at some point. But it's quite a big jump to actually be with a highly religious family, which I'm sure you would agree that yours were. To jump to wanting to go and be a monk, that's quite a big jump, isn't it?
Absolutely huge.
Yeah.
It's strange. Obviously, I was just involved in the family. I was involved in everything that the family were involved in. And most of the social life of the Catholic families at that stage revolved around, or in the community, so things were happening in the community. And it was only on one occasion when, I don't know how it came about, but my family took me to basically an exhibition, something like a religious NEC, so to speak. So that instead of all the different stalls, you actually had different areas of the Catholic faith, and people were visiting these with a view to joining. It was like a recruitment campaign. So it was a case of have a wander around, and if that's what you fancied, take your pick, really. And it's quite strange because there were so many religious orders there. There was the Dominicans and the Franciscans and all sorts of missionary orders, any number. There are more and more, or there were more and more in those days. And it's strange because I actually wandered onto this particular stall, and it was called the Redemptorists. And I thought, that's interesting. They're missionaries, and straight away it struck a chord with me. I thought, that's what I want to be. I want to be a missionary. I want to go out to Africa and far-flung places and convert people, help people. And so that's how it came about. And the fact that it was neither a contemplative order, because the contemplative orders basically the ones that don't speak and are locked in a monastery all the time, and then there's the missionary orders that go out and preach the gospel to people. Well, this was both. It was half and half, really. So half the time you spent in the monastery praying and doing what you do, and the rest of the time it would be out preaching the word and mixing with people, and that appealed to me even from the age of 11, which was very unusual.
It's a very impressionable age, 11 as well, isn't it, for both girls and boys?
Yes, the fact that Arthur had already made the leap, he'd actually already decided to become a priest, and he went to St. Bede's College to become a parish priest. This was a different thing altogether, but age 11, it's one of those ages where you say what you want to do, but you don't really. You want to be an astronaut, you want to be a train driver, whatever. And that's really weird because I'm sure I wanted to be all sorts of things at that age. I probably wanted to be a footballer for City, all sorts of things. But when I went to this exhibition, then it's just something that struck me. Now, whether or not that was all my decision or whether it was auto-suggestion from people I know, my family, or perhaps even my brother, sort of, influencing how I was thinking, is hard to say, really, because what 11-year-old really knows their mind? not really, do they? I don't think so anyway, not to that extent. And it actually came as a big shock to me once I actually made the decision, because as soon as I made the decision, it was like everything sort of happened. Things sort of took over, and I began to sort of get on a roller coaster, and I thought, whoa, it's going a bit fast, this. I don't know if I like it going this fast, but it did, and it kept going, and before I know it, I was all signed up, and before I knew it, I was on the train to Erdington Abbey, the junior seminary.
Yeah. And what we're going to do now is we're going to have a piece of music, and I should just say that Steve is actually staying with me throughout the show, so you'll have plenty of time to phone in or email in with a question. I'm going to give those numbers out as well. The phone number of the studio is 01928 835 291. That's 01928 835 291. Or you can email studio@hcr923fm.com. I should just say we've had a few emails come in, including one from you, Carl. So don't worry, I will attend to that sometime in the show, so don't worry. But we're going to play an Elvis track for you, and we will explain the importance of Elvis to you. Some obviously people who know you will know exactly what I'm talking about. But the first track we'll play is, I think we'll play I Remember You, because there's a significance to that, isn't there? Yes, significance.
Yes, there is actually.
Yeah?
It's my wife's favourite song of all time. She absolutely loves it. It's a real soft ballad, and she said it makes her cry every time she hears it, particularly when I sing it.
This is HCR.
And you're listening to Sue Ellison. I'm here every Tuesday afternoon, 2 till 4, with my magazine show. And if you've just tuned in, my guest in the studio is Stephen Nearey, whose book, The Nearly Man, is out, and it's very good as well. Okay, let's carry on where we left off. So you decided at 11 that you wanted to be a monk, and it was the Redemptorist that attracted you. Now, certainly as a child, I would read about the likes of Albert Schweitzer, David Livingstone, who basically brought Christianity to countries where it wasn't. So that was a kind of quite a romantic idea. So as an 11-year-old, were you quite sort of, what were your interests apart from your football?
Not that many, I guess, really.
Yeah.
Like, just probably the same as any 11-year-old. I didn't have a great interest in wanting to become a missionary or a monk. It was only when I actually went to the exhibition that this actually just grabbed me. And from then on, we spoke about it, and goodness knows how we actually came to the decision to actually say, yes, let's go. But we did, and obviously it was my decision in that I must have said the words somewhere, I'd like to do that, but how much they were just my words or whether other people had suggested it to me or perhaps persuaded me is very hard to say now. It's a long time, it's 50 years ago now, so... So
your parents were obviously encouraging?
Yes, obviously they encouraged me. It was a big privilege for them. They would encourage me to do it, but only if I wanted to, and I said I wanted to, so, that's how it was,
What was the attitude of your older brother at that time? Was he kind of indifferent, encouraging?
Do you know, I don't really know. I'd probably say indifferent, really.
You've never had that conversation, no?
No, it's strange. Arthur and I, we love each other dearly, but we never really spoke a great deal, particularly at that stage. We do now, but not so much at that stage. He was getting on with his life. I did mine, even though we were young. Arthur had already gone to St. Bede's. He was a boarder there. And so it was really down to my own decision, really. Arthur didn't, as far as I remember, he didn't really have any persuasion in the decision. What
was the age difference between you?
2.5 years.
Oh, it's quite close.
Quite close, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
So what happened next? What was the immediate thing that once you decided? I mean, your schooling up till then was...
It was just secondary modern. I'd failed my 11 plus. I wasn't really going anywhere particularly. I wasn't particularly bright, unfortunately. I was quite slow in many ways. I think I was a slow learner rather than...
Late developer. Yeah, I think that's the expression, yeah.
Because since then, I'd like to think I've developed quite well, but I was certainly a late developer then, and quite young for my age. So it's quite difficult to actually say what was the tipping point, really. What was it that actually made me say, yes, I'll do it, but I did. And I think as a result of this exhibition, I did say, yes, I'd like to go and do that. But I can't say for sure how much there was in terms of parental persuasion or anybody else's persuasion. The school, the parish priest, they were all part of this. You know, they would likewise be very happy to see pupils go on to become a priest or a missionary or monk. Mm. So, and before I knew it. It was all signed and sealed, and I was ready to go and leave home.
So there was no kind of what you would call an interview or I was going to say an audition. Then there was no kind of interview situation that arose.
It was actually at the exhibition, though.
Ah.
It was actually at the exhibition. I don't actually remember having any further meetings. Certainly didn't go to Birmingham to have one. So the only discussions I had were actually there at the religious exhibition. And so I basically made that decision just like that. You know, so it's pretty impromptu and a long time to regret it if it's wrong, that's for sure. But that's not how I felt at the time. You know, I felt it was right. Although obviously I was young, I was scared of leaving home. I was very close to my mother particularly, and I didn't feel that I wanted to leave home. And yet, as I say, it was as if I was jumping on a roller coaster, and this whole process had started, and I was just being swept up and carried along on it. And I wasn't. It's not as if I wasn't wanting to do it, but it was sweeping me along at such a rate that it was pretty hard to make it all stop, even if I wanted to. Mm. So before I knew it, I decided, and I was on the train to Birmingham to start the process.
You see, I do find this quite fascinating, because quite often at different periods of our lives, where before you kind of really know your own mind, you can be sort of carried along in a situation, and certainly it's difficult to kind of question adults, I would think, as well. Too closely question adults. Maybe there were a lot of questions that you wanted to ask, but as you say, you were carried away.
Yes, I was too young and too immature to ask the right questions,
really. Yeah.
And but the image of what I was planning to do had an attraction, obviously, and all of a sudden it's it's something that you just get swept along with, and thought, yes, this is a great idea. It's exciting. It's new, and going to live away from home at a boarding school. Didn't know when I'd ever come back. Obviously, time for regret, but I didn't regret it at the time. You know, I was quite excited at the prospect.
Mm-hmm. Okay, excuse me. As I say, Steve is staying with me right the way through till 4 o'clock. So I'm going to give the email address and the phone number again, should you want to phone in about anything at all. Doesn't necessarily have to be a question or a comment to Steve. You can perhaps, if you're involved with a charity fundraising event or having a special anniversary, birthday, anything at all, then you can phone me, Sue Ellison, here at Halton Community Radio on 01928 835 291, or you can email studio at hcr923fm.com.
This is HCR.
And the guest in the studio today is Stephen Nearey, and we've been talking about his book, The Nearly Man. So, you've decided you want to go down the route of being a monk, and you start to go to the place to study, and this was quite a shock to your system, wasn't it, really?
Well, it was called a junior seminary, which is basically a school, but specifically with the goal in mind of becoming a priest and a Redemptorist monk at the end of it. So it was a very, very, very early age to start, obviously, 11 years old. In many ways, the training was just a normal education, but then it had a lot of additional things which would then make it a far more detailed education and specific education in order to become a priest and a monk.
Now, at this particular time, how often would you have been seeing your parents? Would you have written to them? Would you have visited them? How often would that have been?
Well, there were no visits except for 3 times a year, so Christmas, Easter, and then summer holidays. So the rest of the time it was like a normal boarding school where we'd be away for the whole of the term time. We did communicate quite often. Obviously, there were no mobile phones in those days, so it was just by letter. So I was a good letter writer. I would write home every week, and Mum and Dad would also write back every week. So there was communication, but no telephone communication at all. So it was just by a letter, really, which was it's quite a lot to miss, really. Or when you think that the only communication is 1 letter a week, and there's no sort of physical contact, there's no telephone contacts, just a letter. So at that age, it's quite something to get used to, and very difficult.
Typical day at that particular point. What would you do?
Well, 6 o'clock up, 6:30 into the chapel for meditation, which was hard going for somebody of our age, really hard. Just had to sit and meditate on the meaning of life, on religion and anything else. Some people used to catch up on their sleep, I'm sure, but and then straight after meditation was Mass, and then it was breakfast, pretty simple breakfast. We used to have cereal followed by fried bread and beans, which was my staple diet for 6 years. Not the most healthy diet in the world. In fact, it was later to cause me some quite serious health problems, but there it was. And then from there on in, straight after breakfast, we all had a job to do. My job was cleaning a huge corridor, which would take about half an hour. Matron would come and check whether we'd done it correctly before it was signed off, and then we had about half an hour before it was into lessons. Morning lessons, 9 till about 12, lunch, and then about half an hour out in the grounds, kicking a football around or having a natter with the friends, and then tea time, and then straight after tea would be study again. And so from 5 o'clock till 7:30, we had 2.5 hours of study, which was pretty tough going. I mean, when you think of homework for school children these days, it's not 2.5 hours, and yet we had to spend 2.5 hours, dealing with some pretty tough subjects. And then it was half an hour recreation, a maximum, and then 9:30, lights out, bed. And that was a typical day.
So obviously you would have been taught Latin.
Yes, yeah. Latin was crucial. I mean, obviously Latin is the language of the church, but not only that, it is actually taught in most public schools and private schools as well, because it's actually the foundation of most languages. It's certainly the foundation of English, of French, of Spanish, and other languages. So just from a schooling point of view, Latin was a good language to learn, even though I absolutely hated it. But
now, was this where you would have the breakfast in silence and there would be someone older, that they would be reading stories in connection with the saints? Would that have been then, or would that have been later?
It was both, actually. Even at Erdington, which we call the Juvenate, during meal times, we used to have a reading first of all during the meal. That would last for about 20 minutes, half an hour, and then we could chat for the rest of the meal. So it was a bit of both, really.
Friendships. There was you weren't supposed to be overly close to individuals, even though obviously you would have more in common with the juniors like yourself.
Well, that was later on, really.
Was that later? Right.
Later on at Perth and at Hawkstone. At Erdington, we were just boys, and we did have personal friends. We did have mates, the ones that we chummed around with. But I had lots. I mean, there were 50 of us there, and I was friendly with many of them, and yeah, we had a good time, really.
At that particular time, your health was okay?
Yes, yeah. I was absolutely fine. I was just like any normal teenager. I was as skinny as a rake. I had boundless energy. And I was absolutely fine at that stage.
Were you enjoying it, or was it kind of love-hate relationship that you liked some of it and didn't like some of it?
It was more love than hate at that stage. I did like it because it was a great life. It was fresh outdoors in many ways, and
very regimented though, in the sense of it.
Very regimented,
yeah.
But I'd not been used to anything else at that age, so it was just the normal life as far as I was concerned. But yes, a lot more regimented than it would be at school. And of course, in the evenings, that was structured as well, whereas if I was at home, I'd be out with my mates perhaps, doing other things. At weekends, if I was at home, it would be something different. But here, we didn't go out in the evenings, we just stayed in, studied, had a play, went to bed basically, and that was it. So yes, it was very regimented. But I did enjoy it in the main, although it's probably fair to say that every time I went home, I had thoughts about not coming back, every single time. And probably because I missed home. I missed my brothers and sisters, I missed mum and dad. I just missed the life, basically. But then when I got back to Erdington, to the Juvenate, I saw my friends again, then I tended to forget about it and just got on with it. So
there's quite a big dropout rate, wasn't there? Each year there would be someone dropping out.
Oh, every year. We started in, I think it was 12 in my class.
I'm proving that I've read the book, you see.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, there were 12 when we started, and by the time I got to the sixth form and we were ready to move on to the next stage at Perth, the novitiate, then we were down to 5. So I lost 7 of my friends, basically, and that was hard to take. And the strange thing was, because they would just disappear overnight, which I always found to be a horrible experience. One day you'd be chatting to your friends, and then the next morning at breakfast, the priest would come in and he'd say, just thought I'd better tell you that so-and-so has decided that he doesn't want to continue, and he's gone to live back home with his family. And that was it. Never heard of them again, never saw them again, and that was it. It was hard to take because I lost some very good friends that way, and that continued right throughout the different stages, both at Perth and later on at Hawkstone, where I lost people that I grew to like very much.
So you were there for so many years, and then the next step was quite a big hurdle, wasn't it?
Oh, it was huge. I was at Erdington for 6 years, and that was my normal education, GCEs, the rest of it. The next step...
But you did have some success. I mean, I think you surprised yourself at certain points, because you achieved certainly some qualifications that you knuckled down to quite a degree, and you were quite... I suppose they wouldn't have appreciated the word pride, but you must have been quite proud of yourself, as your family must have been, to make those,
yes,
not having a huge amount of exam success as a youngster.
That's absolutely right. It was learning was always difficult for me, and when I went to Erdington initially, I was very slow. I was always bottom of the class, and it took me a while till I was probably 14, even 15, and then I started making rapid strides. So by the time I got round to doing the GCE O levels, it was probably through sheer hard work and persistence rather than any great ability, but I made it, and I had the distinction of being the only student not to have failed a GCE, so that was my fame to claim. Mm-hmm. So I was quite pleased about that.
So then you had to make this decision, and as it says in the book, there had been some, at least in the early stages, financial support from your family who weren't very wealthy.
No,
and I think there was a sense of, certainly it came out in the book, there was a sense of thinking, I don't want to let people down, I don't want to let family down, I don't want to let people who trained me, people who I'm close to, if I step back at any point along the way, then there's so many people that I'm failing.
That's absolutely true, and those thoughts were with me all the time from being 11 till the very, very day that I eventually left the monastery. And it was, a lot of it was about not letting people down, not making them unhappy, and that was always at the forefront of every decision I made. And it's fair to say that when it came to the end of my time at Erdington, the Juvenate, and it was a big leap to actually make the decision to go to the monastery and become a proper monk, that was the biggest decision of all. And the truth was that I didn't actually make the decision. It just happened. I think my tutors, the priests, basically just sat me down one day and said, right, it's time, you've done your 6 years, and next step is this, we go to Perth. And, oh, right, okay. And I didn't really know what had hit me. I thought I'd have been sat down and had a talk about it and see whether it's really what I wanted to do, but it never actually happened. It was just assumed that that was what was going to happen, and in the end, I allowed it to happen.
I should just say your bedroom was actually called a cell, and yes. It was the simplest of places, and not terribly warm, and you know, you didn't have that much freedom. There was one which I'm not going to go into detail because it might spoil it, but there was one particularly heroic football match with a much older school that you would go out and play with different teams, and there was this rather heroic match which we won't go into detail, but I just wanted to reach through to that child and give them a huge hug and say well done, because having heard your life story up to that point, then all these achievements were 10 times more special in your particular case. You did go out to work. I should have made notice about this, in a factory situation, and you did meet, I think you were in your teens at the time, and you did meet a lovely young girl who befriended you, and you became quite close to her, and that confused you massively, didn't it? Oh, it certainly did.
This was when I was 16. It was during the summer holiday when we would break up from term at Erdington. Come home. I had never had any experience of girls at all. They were just another species as far as I was concerned. And I went to work in this factory just down the road. Mum and Dad worked there, and my brother as well, which was odd. But yes, I met this young girl called Jill, and she kind of made all the running initially. I was very, very slow, and I wouldn't have dreamt of making the first approach. I was very shy, and but she certainly took a liking to me, and I took a liking to her. That's for sure. And it was a very difficult time for me because I had this big decision to make as to, was I going to go back to Erdington and finish my final year of studies there? And initially I didn't tell her. She didn't know that I was actually going to train to be a priest at that stage. But we went out and we had a good time, went to a couple of parties, that sort of thing, and then I had to sit down with her and say, sorry, but you know, I'm actually training to be a priest at this stage, and as much as I really love our relationship, I'm probably going to go back, and I can't just make a big decision that quickly. I said it's something I'd have to do over a period of time. And so, very sadly, I actually went back to Erdington, and although I did keep in contact with her for a short period of time, eventually I think she got fed up of waiting, basically, and well, the next thing I heard, she was actually seeing somebody else, so it put an end to it. So,
but again, that was a touch-and-go situation, whether you went back. Now, what we're going to do is, I'm very aware of the time, we're going to play another piece of music, and then we're going to carry on the story from there on in, and also talk particularly about a chap called Keith, who inspired you to write your book. So we've got to mention him, and also about your wife. So we'll get to that story as well. Now, your next choice of music is actually by Gary Barlow, and there's a relevance to why you wanted Gary Barlow, because we talked earlier about your obsession. I think that's a fair word to say for Elvis Presley. And you do actually perform as Elvis and Buddy, don't you, for charity?
I do, yes, absolutely right.
And you're going to be doing that on the 5th of September at the British Legion?
Yes,
right.
Yeah.
And because Gary Barlow played at the British Legion in his youth when he was starting out, then you thought that this track might be appropriate.
Oh, not only that, but my wife Anna, she really likes this. You know, it's a big favourite of hers. So
it's a double whammy.
That's it.
Yeah, that track there was Gary Barlow with Let Me Go, and that was the second choice of piece of music by my guest Stephen Nearey. Now we've got quite a lot to cram in, and I know we want to mention about this beautiful, beautiful place called Hawkstone, and that was where you progressed to. And what age would you have been then?
21.
Right. And unfortunately, you went there. Do you know who I have to mention? Father Thomas, because he was an elderly chap, and he and you became very, very close, and he came over so beautifully in your writing, and he wasn't a kind of typical how can I describe it? He was quite kind of flexible in his outlook, and he was definitely a fatherly figure to you, wasn't he?
Oh, without a doubt. He was, in fact, Brother Thomas. He wasn't a priest.
Father Thomas, he was Brother Thomas, yeah.
He was Brother Thomas. So basically, the brothers worked on the farm. They were very down-to-earth, and, they lived the monastic life and didn't go out and do anything that we would do. So he was a wonderful person, and it was at the time while I was at Hawkstone, it was during the period where I was really finding life very difficult, both with the studies and emotionally. I'd started to become very emotional, and starting to feel that perhaps the monastic life wasn't for me anymore. And Brother Thomas was somebody. He was 88. I was 21. It was an unlikely liaison, really. But I formed a kind of relationship with him. I guess it was grandfatherly, I suppose, in that respect. And he would guide me. I did tell him, I did confide a little. He was probably the only person I ever confided in, that I was finding things difficult on both fronts, really, in terms of the learning and also the emotional side of becoming a monastic. And I found that he was such a wonderful person. He had a great experience of life, but it was a very narrow experience because he'd been a monk ever since he was a boy. So his experience of life was quite narrow, and yet he had this terrific wisdom. And he would pass this on to me, and he would help me when I was feeling down or didn't really know which way to go. He was there to support and help me, and he was the most wonderful person. And when he died during the time I was there, I was heartbroken, to be honest. Even though we weren't supposed to have any particular friendships, I couldn't help but have a friendship with this man because he was such a wonderful person.
You have actually visited this place several times, haven't you? I
have indeed, yes, several times since. It's now up for sale, unfortunately, because the way the redemptorists are going and all these various orders, they're having a tough time financially. I mean, this costs £1,500 a day to run. It's a huge country home, stately home. And there are no longer enough people there to make it viable. It's changed now from training priests and monks to giving missions and spiritual renewal courses.
You were around this time starting to go into a training situation yourself for young people. So you went out, didn't you? And you absolutely adored doing this.
I did. For a period of time, I went out teaching catechism, which, for those that don't know, is basically simple Bible studies for Catholics. And I used to love this because I always felt, or certainly in the last year or so at Hawkstone, I felt as if I was very, very enclosed, claustrophobic. I needed to get out. I needed to be not inside. I needed to be outside. And I felt the best way was to volunteer for this. And I did actually volunteer, and I loved going to a place called Shawbury in Shropshire. I used to cycle there, 6 miles there and 6 miles back every evening, about twice a week. And I used to teach the young children about the catechism, the meaning of life, God, as we knew it. And so it was a great experience for me, and I hope they got something out of it too.
But then you started to lose weight, and I've seen you show me photographs of yourself. You're quite tall, quite slim, and you started to lose weight, and because a very long story short, you ended up in hospital, didn't you? And you very nearly lost your life.
I did, yes. But basically, I started losing weight. I knew that eventually I did see a doctor who diagnosed it was a problem with my stomach of some sort. And he told me I'd have to go into hospital for an operation because I'd lost over a stone. I was only a stick insect anyway, so it had to be investigated and sorted out. So I went into hospital to Shrewsbury Royal Infirmary to have this operation.
Mm-hmm. And of course, there again, you were befriended by several nurses who you became very, very close to. And obviously that was mutual. And in one particular case, a lovely lady called Margaret. Yes,
it was, for me, being out of the monastery and in what you might class a normal environment, as if a hospital can be classed as a normal environment, it was totally different from the routine I would have every day. And never in my life had I really told anybody how I felt. I wasn't able to express myself and let people know. It was a difficult time, and I didn't know how I was going to sort out my life, whether I would go ahead and become a priest or whether I wouldn't. And it was at this stage, after I'd been really very ill, as you say, and I did nearly lose my life after 2 very serious stomach operations. And I just started speaking to my nurse, Margaret, who really looked after me very well. And I found out that, unlike anybody else that I'd ever been involved in my life so far, Margaret was empathetic. She could understand, where I was coming from. She could understand what I was talking about, and we became as friendly as you could under that circumstance. I mean, basically, I was a patient, she was a nurse, but we did have times to chat in between times when things were quiet. And, of course, it did develop from there.
And, of course, that brought you to a bit of a crossroads situation because you realised that there was a kind of a middle ground where you went to stay with your family to recuperate, convalesce, afterwards. And of course, this brought you to the conclusion, because I think Margaret was quite concerned that if you left because of her, then she would never quite be able to forgive herself. But there was, I think you were starting to come to the conclusion that it wasn't, because you believed that you were chosen, weren't you? Because you'd been told in your training over and over again that you would be chosen to go down this path. And then you thought that this was a huge privilege, which you mentioned numerous times in the book. And even though many of your friends had dropped out, even one chappie who broke the rules by coming along to tell you that he would be going home the next day, which they weren't supposed to do. And all these incidents built up to make you come to the final decision.
Yes, as I say, I was in the hospital at the time, and I had confided in Margaret, and we'd become very close. And when I did eventually go home to recuperate, and in fact the director at the seminary didn't want me to go home. In fact, he wanted me to return to the monastery, but I told him I didn't feel able to return to the monastery, and that I either wanted to be sent to one of the other monastic houses away from Hawkstone, or I wanted to go home to my parents and recuperate there because I'd felt so ill. So very reluctantly, he let me go home, and so we went along with that, and I did go home, and I decided that I would see Margaret during that period. It wasn't a sexual relationship at any stage. It was only ever an emotional relationship, and I told Margaret that I felt that I couldn't leave because of her, and she told me that she couldn't make a proper relationship with me if it meant that she was the cause of me leaving. And so I actually went back to the monastery after I'd fully recuperated. And it was from there that I then had to make the momentous decision on my own, really.
So this huge part of your life and you didn't know what you wanted to do or where you were going to go. And I should just say that there is a follow-up book to The Nearey Man, which you're working on now.
That's correct.
And
yes.
we have to mention, is it Keith Daniel?
Yes, Keith, yes.
Friend who on holiday inspired you, because you were telling him all the stories and he was so fascinated. He said, you have to write a book. And in a sense, he and your wife Anne sort of pushed you into doing it.
They did. I had thought about it, but I never really got down to doing it. And we were sat in our motorhomes. We were both keen motorhomes and having a drink. And after we'd talked about politics and religion, all sorts of things, I was telling Keith about my background, and he said, that's fascinating. You really must write a book. There's a book in you there somewhere. And I thought, yes, you're absolutely right. And I started writing it almost straight away.
Now, we have to just say that this book is available to buy if people want to buy it. And is there anyone you very quickly want to mention who's helped and supported you?
Well, obviously, my family, obviously, Arthur, Mum and Dad, but they're both dead now, of course. But my brother Arthur, my sister Kathy, and my brother Mike, they were all very, very supportive and have been since. But particularly more than anyone, it has to be my wife Anne, because Anne has been my driving force in everything I have done over the last 30 or 40 years. She's an amazing woman, and without her drive, then I wouldn't have done any of the things that I now do.
And if people want to purchase these books, one of these books, they can, can't they? Is the details on the book?
Yes, it is.
You know the details, all right? Yeah.
Yes, it is presently on sale through Amazon, although it is being republished prior to Christmas by a big London publisher. But at the present time, it is available if you go online to www.amazon.com and then just put in The Nearey Man, that's Nearly, man, reference 4420172, and you'll be able to buy it on Amazon. I would say it is being published with some additional text fairly close to Christmas by a big London publisher, so I hope it to be available nationally then in all the big bookstores.
I have to very quickly ask you, you are a father. Would you want your sons to go down being a priest or a monk? No. I know they haven't, but would you have wanted them to?
If they'd have wanted to, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
Now that's interesting, even though you know everything that you know.
Yes.
We just have a couple of minutes left to the end of the show. I'm Sue Ellison, you're listening to Horton Community Radio, and your final choice is an Elvis.
It is, yes.
Which we're not going to be able to hear all of it, but we can hear of some of it, and it's called...
Steamroller Baby.
Here we go.